Welcome to the Soccer Nova Scotia Best Practice online presentation of Summer 2015. During the course of this presentation, we will review long-term player development. We're going to look at some of the challenges that we currently face in Nova Scotia in regards to player development, retaining coaches, and general consistency of programming. We will look at the long-term objectives the Soccer Nova Scotia have set out for community soccer. We'll take the best practice manual and review its new contents and how that can help you run your club and your programs. We'll look at the player and how the manual is designed based around the development of the athlete using the four-corner model. And we'll finish with reviewing the Canadian Soccer Association's preferred training model.
And I think parents just need to go back to their youth. I was Paul Gascoigne, I was Maradona. Every time I went out and played, I didn't have anyone telling me I couldn't be anyone else but those heroes.
Most importantly, what do the kids say? What do the kids want from their football experience? Because it's not the adults' game, it's the kids' game.
It's really fun to play soccer, and no matter how we do, I know that we tried our best.
Those fundamental years from 5 through to 12, call it LTPD or not, but the principles are there. And that 5 to 12 is fall in love with the game. So I think we've lost sight of really what this sport's about and how easy and how simple it can be for people to fall in love.
In everything that we do, certainly at the grassroots side, this is about the 99% of kids that are never going to make it anywhere near a professional football club. This is about giving them the best experience, and nobody stops doing something because it's just too much fun. So we have to make that experience so good they don't want to leave the game.
The fact that I'm on a team where my friends are just amazing, they're just so encouraging, that's what keeps me coming back, and we're such a fun group.
And falling in love with the game is about equipping people technically to be able to play the game, the real game, the 11v11 game, when we get old enough to do that.
The whole concept of grassroots soccer is built along age and stage development activities for the children. What we're doing is improving the playing format. By that I mean we're going to 5v5, 7v7 and 9v9. We're changing the size of the balls. Age and stage appropriate coaching, meaning coaching a 5-year-old is different than coaching a 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old. So educating coaches on the characteristics of children, how that children learns, and how the coach can educate that child at that particular age and stage of his or her development.
So what was the theme of this practice today, especially the one I was watching here?
It's great for kids. If you think of the adult game, the amount of time a player is actually on the ball is quite small. So the fact that everything's small-sided and there's maximum touches on the balls, it just means the kids get more practice, get more in, and I think it's just a more appropriate learning environment for them.
Learn the game and understand the game, develop the skills in the game, and and the sports science tells us that that they need to develop that in stages. Kids, they develop at different stages, both physically and also psychologically.
It's the stair-step approach up to playing the 11-a-side game. And giving the players the tools they need through that stair-step approach of not only technique but also individual and group tactics along the way.
To be honest, I think it's a nonsense argument. If you put two U7 teams on a pitch, they want to win.
I find that it allows kids to be more competitive. I think it takes the edge off of them and they're not afraid to make mistakes. If kids are afraid to make a mistake, then they're not going to try the skills that we've been implementing in practices. If they're afraid to take on a player or do a move because if they make a mistake, they've got a coach yelling at them on the sideline, then they won't try and do it again.
For myself as a parent, that process is more important than the process of winning a $5 trophy at the end of the day.
Losing requires coping skills, and those coping skills don't really evolve until players hit their teenage years, when they're cognitively ready to cope with and emotionally ready to cope with certain things.
What's different about LTPD is everybody's playing, everybody's having fun. We're not worried about what the score is. You know, people are keeping score in their heads, that's fine. What we're worried about here is Johnny having fun, is Marco playing the game, is Marco working on the skills we taught him in practice.
As a child and youth worker, I work with the kids, and the esteem and the confidence the most important thing for the players.
What you're going to understand is children start scripting real strong scripts from the age of 5 to 13. So a lot of the things that, the vulnerabilities they take in adulthood started very young.
Press the ball! No one behind you, White!
Parents don't understand that one of the most powerful things is your gift of speech. And you have to be very careful what you say as a parent, as a coach. And you're better off saying nothing than something if it's not going to be helpful.
Listen, I don't even want to say anything. You know why? Because you guys did an awesome job. I'm not going to say one thing because you guys are awesome.
That's it! Good job!
Nice job.
The children are allowing us to come into their game. It's not our game. It's not an MLS game. It's not a women's professional soccer league game. So relax and enjoy their game.
In Nova Scotia, we need to face the realities. And the realities right now are that our player membership is declining across most of the programs, specifically once the child leaves or the player leaves from U12 going into the U14 category. This is not abnormal to anywhere else and not any other sports, as current research suggests that players are leaving sport as high as 70%, and with them usually making the reason that it's just no longer fun. And that's not because U14 soccer is no fun. It's because the experience that they've received in the earlier ages have not lived up to their expectation. They've probably not been stimulated. They've probably not received the tools to play the game at the 11-a-side format, and therefore they move on to something else. Number two, our clubs are struggling to retain coaches. Getting hold of volunteers is a difficult task, but once we've got them, we need to ensure that they have an enjoyable experience so that they return. In order to do that, we need to support them. We need to encourage and make sure that they go on workshops so that they're trained. We need to ensure that we follow up and we mentor them so that they can improve. And we need to review our current program structure and see if there's a way that we can make it less taxing for them and their experience. And number three, programs are inconsistent across Nova Scotia. The delivery from the coach may differ, but the content should be the same. And unfortunately, programs from Yarmouth to Halifax to Truro to Sydney are all too inconsistent, and therefore long-term player development and best practice is not being established and ran at the clubs. Soccer Nova Scotia do have a long-term community initiative to develop all facets of the game. Stage one is where we currently are at, and that's to revise and then relaunch the Soccer Nova Scotia best practice. And the idea is simply to promote and align with long-term player development and the CSA for the active start, fundamental and learning to train stages. Stage two is to implement mandatory coaching certification. This is where all Soccer Nova Scotia players receive trained coaches regardless of the region or the club. Simply put, you're paying money to put your player in a program, and you should receive quality service. You send your children to school and you expect them to receive the same service in terms of education. This should be treated no differently to soccer or sport. So currently Soccer Nova Scotia have got a project plan for mandatory coaching. It is currently being reviewed and consistently being edited. Those details are not ready to be published, but we are aware that we need to make them more accessible and more affordable. Stage three is to then review the current structure of the NCCP, evaluating the content, making sure that it's appropriate, talking to the Canadian Soccer Association to make the correct edits if that is necessary. We'll continue to look at the learning facilitators and ensure that the delivery is appropriate from them, and to then investigate and how we can roll out all coaching workshops in an online format that again meets the needs of being accessible and inclusive to all across the province. Stage 4 is to review, to construct, and to make available a best practice Soccer for Life edition. Again, this needs to ensure that it's aligned with long-term player development and the CSA. It also will mean we have to currently review our current competition structure and see if we need to make changes to all levels from U14 to senior. This document is quite complicated because there are many different entry points for senior soccer from U14, Tier 1, Tier 2, all the way up to senior where you have co-ed over 45s, and all those details need to be recorded accurately. Stage 5 is a club excellence model. Once we have best practice being implemented and mandatory coaching, we then need to start to reward clubs based on to make sure that all the standards are being met. We'll also be not just focusing on technical, but we'll be looking at the club's administration. There will be key performance indicators surrounding the ability for the club to have a club contact email, a contact phone number, website that functions, the ability to register online, and much more. We expect this program to be released sometime during 2016. Stage 6 is to continue to support all clubs and programs to observe and ensure that those standards are being met, to offer workshops, resources, and just to generally assist with the growth of the club. So what is the revised best practice? Well, Soccer Nova Scotia reviewed many associations and had a look at what they are actually putting out to their members in conjunction with what the Canadian Soccer Association wants us to do with long-term player development. So we have provided an extensive resource for all programs ranging from the U4 Active Start to U8 Fundamental to U10, U12 Learning to Train, which is consistent with that model. With this book, you also have the ability to provide the best possible opportunities and experience for players using the guidelines and expectations that are outlined. It's going to help us set provincial-wide standards to strive towards, not specific just to one club. And it's also going to allow us to look and review our programs right now and evaluate them to ensure that those measurables that are outlined in the book are being met. If they're not, at least we have a starting point to try and make the difference and make the change for the player's experience. So the best practice breakdown is the first 3 stages. Each stage will have a philosophy of how the program should be run. It will also look at the game format, making sure that coaches and programs understand that at Active Start U6, it's 3 versus 3 with no goalkeeper. Whereas at Fundamental, it's 5 versus 5. U10 is 7 versus 7. And U12 is 9 versus 9. We'll also look at the characteristics of each player based on this stage of development. That's not just the technical ability, but also the social and emotional, the mental stage of the player. We're going to look at practice recommendations that come from those characteristics. For example, an Active Start player is very egocentric, so teaching them to pass and receive the ball with a teammate is going to result in little success and probably a frustration to both you and the player. We're going to look at the coaching methodology and making sure we understand which methodologies are appropriate for each stage. For example, we don't necessarily want to be doing too much of question and answer and guided discovery for the Active Start stage. They simply need more of a direct approach and they need to visually see you do the activity. The field organization also is outlined, so if you have a standard 11-a-side pitch, we'll show you how you can fit those 5 versus 5, 7 versus 7 fields onto those 11-a-side pitches so you can get more games out of those fields. And obviously Soccer for Life, that is coming soon in 2016. The book does discuss the importance of the 4-corner development model. All sessions that are exampled in the book and all of the matrix and measurables are outlined through the 4 corners. And the 4 corners are broken down from technical, tactical, the physical, social, emotional, psychological, and mental. So each corner reflects a wide aspect of that player's development. Priorities will vary during the different age and stage of their development based on maturity and just general the size of the player. And it will assist with establishing the status of a player's progress and development. The book does provide specific tools that will help a coach and a club understand what they should be focusing on in their program. The matrix is broken down into the 4 corners and is done on a priority-based system, with number 1 being high and 4 being not applicable. So in the active start stage, obviously a lot of the basic fundamental movements from running to running backwards, they are high priority, whereas heading a ball and passing will be less and will be further down as maybe a 2, 3 or even 4. Coaches can also look at the measurables. So each stage will have what a child or what a player should be able to do once they've left that stage. So in there it's broken down using the 4-corner model. And again, for example, we expect a fundamental player to be able to at least to start to dribble the ball with their right and left foot and pass the ball with their right and left foot. This is something that a coach should probably look to tick off as they go through the program, or the program coordinator. And finally, there are some session examples for each stage. There are only 2 per stage, and it breaks it down into the 4-corner model. Sessions are available using the Canadian Soccer Association's Coaches Toolkit, which is provided on the Soccer Nova Scotia website under the Coaches section. You can also find this on the Canadian Soccer Association's website as well. We're going to look at now the Canadian Soccer Association's preferred training model. And this is a program and a tool to help maximize the experience for the player and also to take the load off the volunteer coach. So what this is more of a jamboree style format, which is not a new concept, but it's not simply just stations randomly placed on the field. They're carefully selected based on the development needs of the player. So as you see there, it's broken down into the 3 stages. We're an active start stage. The training should be no longer than 45 to 60 minutes, and the station should be comprised of 25% general movement, 25% for coordination, 25% of soccer technique, and 25% of small-sided games. That does vary for the fundamentals, where it becomes a 20%, 20%, 20%, and then 40% for small-sided games. And then as you see, the objective for learning to train is very different, where it's 10% general movement, 10% coordination, 40% now on the technique, and 40% of small-sided games. This program and this tool is very successful because it creates a very stimulating environment for the players. They can feel the energy because there are anywhere between 20, 30, 40, 50 players in the same area. Each group comprises of roughly about 10 players each. They go to every station for probably no longer between 10 and 12 minutes. And the more importantly is the coach is only responsible for 1 station. So they have to literally come up and be comfortable enough to run a 10, 12 minute station rather than being taxed with designing the full hour, which when you're a volunteer is very time consuming. So this takes an awful lot of load off the volunteer coach and will probably encourage them to stick with it if this model is followed within your club. It's important to note that this is just an alternative. It is the preferred and recommended model, but based on numbers, you might not be able to run this model. And if you are looking and working with an academy-based team, particularly of say under 12s, this model shouldn't be used all the time. It could be maybe a tool that you use once every 2 weeks, because obviously teamwork, specific team tactical coaching is important, and they're at that stage where they may need that. However, an under 12 foundation player who's simply there to have fun and learn skills, this model would really suit them, and they'd go away feeling like they've had an enjoyable experience.
'Cause in the sky full of stars, I think I saw you.
If you have any questions relating to the presentation, long-term player development, best practice, or the long-term community initiative that Soccer Nova Scotia are currently looking at implementing, feel free to email me at coach@soccerns.ns.ca. If your club or your region would like more information, presentation in person, again, you can contact that email. We understand that this is a lot of change, and change is not always embraced, but we do encourage all programs, all board members, all regional TDs, all club TDs, and all volunteer coaches to start championing these initiatives, because these initiatives will give the game back to the players and back to the children, and we can grow capacity for Nova Scotia soccer.